Hello, everybody. This is Carly, Chief Executive at Driving Instructors Association, the largest representative body for driver and rider trainers in the United Kingdom. And as such, we've been part of a National Audit Office investigation into driving test waiting times. We were interviewed earlier in the year when the investigation kicked off, and now there's been an official report into their findings. So without much further ado, I'm going to take you through a summary of those findings. And just to explain why this is quite an important development, it's useful, this report, very useful in bringing further scrutiny to bear onto not just DVSA, but also wider government efforts to tackle test waiting time, and has all of their efforts really fall into the category of too little, too late. Let's see what the findings of the report say. So just to give you some background on the National Audit Office, you're probably aware of who they are, but they are the public body that scrutinises public spending for Parliament. It's independent of government and the civil service itself, but it helps Parliament hold government to account and use its insights to help people who manage and govern public bodies, like the Chief Executive of Driving and Vehicle Standards Agency, to improve the services which they're responsible for. The Controller and Auditor General of NAO, Gareth Davis, is an officer of the House of Commons and leads this organisation. NAO audits the financial accounts of departments and other public bodies, examining and reporting on the value for money that service delivers or not, and how public money has been spent. So in this case, it's looking at the efficiency and efficacy of DVSA in its delivery of driving test services. This investigation in particular into driving test delays was commenced in spring 2025, and I'm happy to see that right on target, as it said do, it's published its report in winter 2025. So let's, without further ado, get into some of the key findings. The scope of the audit, just for information as well, was to investigate the issues associated with the delays in delivering testing and dealing with the backlog and examine the causes of that. The report looks at DVSA's plans and progress in tackling these issues. And in this, National Audit Office considered the scale and nature of the waiting times, the root causes of the delays, and how is DVSA actually responding to these issues. So summary of the headline issues identified. So what they looked at in this report was that the average waiting time for practical car tests in Great Britain was 22 weeks in September 2025, when they drew to the conclusions of their actual investigation. And that at that time, DVSA fed back that it did not expect to hit its target waiting time of 7 weeks until November 2027. And as we know in the industry itself, that has been a moving target over the last 4 years since lockdown. We've had many promises, starting with a letter in 21 from the now exited Loveday rider saying that 14 weeks was just not good enough as a waiting time, and they were going to drive it down to 7 weeks back then. And here we are 4 years later. So are we confident that they're even going to make a November 2027 deadline? We very much hope they were, but they've missed quite a lot of deadlines over the last 4 or 5 years. We all know that waiting times have increased significantly since COVID-19 pandemic. We don't need the National Audit Office to tell us that. With many slots also now being booked up by third-party providers, often using automated bots. The great bot excuse of the whole debacle that some of us are cynical is used as more of an excuse than some of the other problems that contribute to the whole problem. Despite several recruitment drives, DVSA has not recruited sufficient examiners to increase test lots. And this is where we get to what I think is more the meat of the entire problem. And exit rates remain high due to uncompetitive pay and safety concerns. So examiners are unhappy about their terms and conditions, their working conditions, the pressure put upon them, and the amount of pay they're getting for all of that as well. So that's contributing to recruitment issues, retention issues, and people just walking out of the organisation. Let's have a little bit of a deeper dive into those key findings, particularly the impact on pupils to begin with. Learner drivers, we know, are facing long waiting times. Some are paying up to 8 times the standard rate for a driving test through third parties due to a failure by DVSA to resolve booking test issues. The average waiting time for a test was 22 weeks in September, as we just said, compared to just over 5 weeks in early 2020, just as pre-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, we had a 5-week waiting time. Now, we've not only seen the national average hit 22 weeks, in over a third of test centres, it looks more like 24 weeks. And as we can say there, 70% of DVSA's test centres, as the NAO has stated here, have a maximum waiting time of 24. There's many of us in the industry also think it's a lot more than that because the true figures are really hidden by the fact that you can only book 26 weeks out in that system. If it was left wide open, would we actually see there was a longer waiting time than we think? DVSA has created and implemented a plan in 24 to reduce waiting time down to 7 weeks by the end of 25. But we all know now that was a pie in the sky plan and a 7 point plan, 25% of which was plans to consult on plans. One of which consultations was something that the industry doesn't feel was the fairest consultation that could have been conducted. And nor have we really seen the mechanics of that consultation result in anything meaningful in terms of some of the other issues that we have with test waiting times. These delays have a serious impact on learners' income and economy. It has a real impact on social and economic mobility for pupils, and it has an impact on their ability to, get where they need to be for leisure purposes, if not just work, caring for someone, getting to college. So you know these problems and the impact on your pupils because you experience them at the coalface of driver education. Now looking at the issue of DVSA's slowness to react, and this is a characterisation of DVSA that you'll see if you read the full report from NAO. This is not just us as an industry saying that they've been slow to react. What is good about this report is it's a third party, a official auditing body who's also recognised some of the same issues. So the agency has been slow to react to other factors that are increasing number of tests needed, such as an increase in those taking theory tests. The agency has not, quite simply and in simple terms, been look on what forecasting and forward data should really have been telling them and existing data. So if there's a lot of people taking theory tests, that means you've got a lot more people who are going to end up at the practical test end. Now, we've long argued that the driving test system in the UK is not fit for purpose anymore. It doesn't necessarily, do the job that it should do to safely gatekeep people to a driving licence. But the other thing the system doesn't do is give them a good enough indication of who is where in their learning journey to be able to plan resources effectively. That's something we looked at engineering into the Milestones project, which DIA designed. It's not just a project looking at modular learning to see if that helps drive down risk of novice drivers. Modular learning and having people at stages and having to pass key goalposts would also mean you would know who was where in a goalposted system, a modular system as well, and be able to plan testing resources around that as well. But they don't have that at the moment, so their ability to forecast is less. However, there are some key indicators that the Audit Office seems to think maybe they didn't pay as close attention to as they should have done. They also struggle to understand the real demand for driving tests due to the high demand being generated by automated programs, i.e. the bots. So the bots skewed the picture of what the real demand for tests was out there. So that didn't help matters as well. But if they'd have been maybe a smarter agency in terms of these things, they could have possibly calculated the impact of the bots and what the real figures were likely to look like. And delays in getting a test are resulting in just under a third of learners booking their tests through third-party websites. So a failure to get on top of these third-party websites and actually stop the system so it can directly provide slots to those who should be in the booking system and not kick those who shouldn't be out has meant more than a third of people have been using these third-party sites and paying significantly inflated prices of up to £500 for a standard weekday test fee of £62. I was asked by a reporter at the Mirror today who was flabbergasted, how is it that a government product with a government set price, regulated by government, can end up in a black market being sold for over £500? And that's one of the big problems that we've seen in this whole scenario. Keir Starmer stands up and said he's going to act on Oasis tickets being sold at vastly increased prices, but not necessarily has he acted firmly enough on a government product which should be controlled in terms of its pricing by government. So DVSA, though, and NAO says this as well, these are not our words, but this is what we all think, has only recently taken action against the reselling of slots through third parties, having only announced in December this month that they are going to only be able to allow learners to purchase slots from 26 onwards, and that anybody else is going to get kicked out of that booking system. That has gone down little bit badly within the industry, but we are where we are with that. That is one move that they feel they have had to make to restrict these bad actors coming in and scraping up the tests and selling them on for vast increases. Whether that will have the impact that they want, we don't know yet. It's bound to have some significant impact, but if bots feel there's still profits to be made in this industry, I'm sure they will find their way into the system somehow. And they've still got a lot of time to play with that until spring 2026 when that shutdown to only pupils actually occurs. DVSA is also hoping to limit the use of automated program to book tests, which remain at high levels despite the implementation of anti-bot protection software. If you dive down into the report itself, you will see that one of the issues that's highlighted in the investigation's findings is that cybersecurity skills within the agency are at quite a low level. So the ability to be able to recognize and target issues of people entering your system that shouldn't be there is lower than a lot of organizations. So commercial organizations are probably a lot better at managing digital platforms and access to them than perhaps government bodies are in the general run of things. But DVSA seems to be more challenged even within the government agency audience with its cybersecurity and the understanding of the people within the agency to deal with these issues. So, upskilling DVSA personnel who have a responsibility for the technology element of what they provide is going to be an important development for their future. Examiner recruitment and retention, we all recognise, is really the core issue of this entire crisis. The booking system is a problem. It's contributed to the issues. But as we said quite publicly, we do feel it's become a red herring, as in something that's trotted out that's a problem, but one which they can be seen to be doing something about much more quickly than examiner recruitment, retention, and pay and attrition. The NAO report found high exit rates among examiners due to perceived uncompetitive pay and safety concerns. If you watched the Transport Select Committee proceedings that I was involved in December 2025, you'll have seen PCS, the Examiners Union, talking about some of the safety aspects that examiners are worried about, the long working hours, the pressure upon them, some of the pressure from pupils who are attending tests and some of the abuse that they receive, coupled with the pay and condition issues that has led to great dissatisfaction and burnout, quite frankly, amongst examiners. So they're leaking people at one end as in existing examiners, but then they've also got this problem that they can't recruit enough people and get them deployed quick enough. So despite 19 recruitment campaigns by DVSA, as the report found, there are only 83 more examiners in place than in 2021, against a goal of 400. Sometimes that figure quoted was actually 450. So depending on which one you want to compare it against here, it's still a poor recruitment result. 19 campaigns. I believe a figure cited in a meeting I was in the other day that over 1,200 individuals have at least interacted with the campaign, whether that's they just put an application in, didn't follow it up, or they've got into the training process and fallen out of that. But to only achieve 83 more examiners than we had in 21, when we know this is the biggest thing that needs to be resolved in the test crisis, is very poor. To meet its targets, NAO says that DVSA must focus on recruiting new examiners to increase the number of driving tests it provides. And really, that comes down to examiner pay and conditions and resolving that issue. This is something we were all aware of already, and it's good that the Audit Office backs that sentiment and has actual evidence on that finding. NAO actually recommends, as a result of its report, and you can read the full report when it's published and the embargo has been lifted, DVSA must focus on recruiting new examiners to increase the number of driving tests it provides. That's what we've been saying for weeks now, in response to their great lauding, DVSA's big PR launch of these new measures. Heidi Alexander trotting off to Transport Select Committee and saying she's got some solutions, one of which was shutting down the booking system to everybody but, to pupils. But nothing really about examiner paying conditions, the core issue. There was talk of drafting in military examiners, but we know that that was only ever going to net in an extra 6,000 tests per year. And again, it's an example of the too little, too late mentality of DVSA and wider ministers' actions on this whole crisis. Maybe if military examiners had been drafted in much earlier when the backlog was building, that 6,000 extra test slots they're generating would have been useful when the numbers were much lower. But as they've built and built and built and no action taken on getting in extra examiner support, or no action that's been successful, that backlog has just built unabated. So, NAO recommends that DVSA and the Department of Transport, because there is criticism of DFT and DFT ministers for not supporting necessarily DVSA as well as they should in this whole issue. So they say that DVSA should explore what is driving increased demand to get a better idea of what's increasing driving test demand, including assessing whether there are enough measures in place to ensure learners are able to book a test when they need to. The other question in all of this is there stuff that we can do to slow down the rush to the test centre, to change that consumer behaviour that since lockdown has meant people book a test as soon as they've got the theory test result, whether they're ready to take a practical driving test at all. So levers that can be pulled to slow down the rush to the test centre are just as important at looking at the booking system itself. Maybe more goalposts or more things you have to do before you can go to the driving test centre are important in slowing down that rush. Clearly, increasing test slots by investigating what is needed to scale up the examiner workforce is another recommendation of this report. And again, that's no surprise to those of us in the industry. And agreeing better governance arrangements between Department of Transport and DVSA that will better support DVSA to respond to future challenges, such as abuse of the booking system or the examiner pay issue, is something that needs to happen. So there it is, the recognition that DFT has possibly not acted to support DVSA as well as it could have done. One of the glaring findings, perhaps not something that's registered on the consciences of the industry as keenly as until this report was published, is this little piece in there, which is actually a big thing, even though it's a smaller part of the report. 44 million test fee deficit has been identified as part of this report. So a key finding is that DVSA has a deficit of £44 million on driving test fees in the year 2024-25. This is due to the driving test fee being lower than the cost of providing a test. So that is a problem, isn't it? We are charging far too little anyway. We all agree that as an industry. A lot of you have said to me, one idea is let's raise the driving test fee and the theory test fee, Carly. And we often put that forward as a potential solution. But now we know that not only is it a good idea to do that to increase the value perception of the driving test and perhaps act as one of those levers to stop the headlong rush to taking a test too quickly, it's also absolutely imperative because the agency simply is not covering its cost of test anyway. So that's why it's got a deficit. So the standard fee charged by DBS, as we know, for a weekday test is 62. That has not changed since 2009. That is ridiculous. DVSA calculates the full cost of delivering. The cost only a driving test is £86. Now, whilst the agency, as a government agency, is not supposed to make too much of a profit, it is allowed to cover its costs and make a small profit to contribute to the sustainability of the service and allow for contingencies. So they should be making more than, they should be delivering in terms of income more than £86 per test. So as we can already see, that test needs to go far beyond £62. So DVSA claims they have been seeking to increase the test fee since 2018. Claiming that you did that, but doing it and achieving that and putting enough oomph behind your pressure and lobbying to do that are two very different things. And in my dealings with DVSA over the last 12 years or so, I have to say, I've not had that many conversations with the agency where they've said that that is a key aim of theirs to increase the driving test fee. So I'm not as convinced that this has been their biggest consideration. And I think if I was operating an organisation where I wasn't covering my costs in my pricing by a clear 20 odd pounds, I would have been pushing to address that fee much earlier and been trying to be much more successful than they have been since 2018. So despite their objectives to fully recover the cost of delivering driving tests, each test delivered, as I said, is at a delivery deficit of £24. So it's high time that we increase the theory test fee and also the practical test fee. Now, there are ways in the future, and they should be doing them now, quite frankly, in a modern world, that the theory test fees costs could go right down. Do we need people sat in expensive leased premises with human beings sat there overseeing the theory test when you have the advent of remote invigilation technology that will allow people to take exams at home and many extremely robust and august qualifying bodies are using remote invigilation to do their qualifying exams. Things like the Association of Accounting Technicians, SEMA, all these really august organisations who are respected for their professional qualifications worldwide are switching to online invigilation so people can take exams at home. That is a question that theory test costs should be going down, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the actual price of it should go down, because really we should be pushing up the value perception of these products and services to make sure that people are valuing them when they come into the process. But that's going to be a tricky one on the theory test if you do start switching down to digital solutions and the cost argument goes down. But I'm sure there's a way around that if there's a will. However, it's really important, if the cost of practical tests has increased and we're not covering that with income, that we do something about that, because any intervention that requires a human being is going to have increased costs associated with it over time. So it's definitely a focus of the agency going forward to recover that deficit, but more importantly, increase the test fee so it's valued more highly in society than it currently is, because that will help in so many more ways with controlling the numbers to test and also controlling how people value the test and value a driving license acquisition process as a whole. You can read the full report because I really just danced through it there. I've only had 24 hours or so to look through it and disseminate some of this information. So you go and have a good look at that report yourself. It's important for our industry that you engage in such reports. So go and have a look at it. It's not a long report. That will have been published on the NAO site when you receive this video. So you should be able to see that on full there. And we will have sent it to our members and published it on drivertraining.org, which is the driver training's most subscribed to news resource in the industry. So have a look at the report, at the commentary on there, and let us know what you think of this investigation. I, for one, am very glad to have been part of such an investigation and the subsequent findings of that. We were unflinching in our feedback of what we thought of what was happening with test waiting times and the efforts of not just DVSA. We can't put it all on their shoulders. They have to be enabled to deal with solutions and deliver solutions by their taskmasters, government ministers, and the wider Department of Transport and government itself. So it's interesting in this report to see findings such as maybe DFT has not supported DVSA as much as it could have done, and glaring gaps in how we deliver things and glaring gaps in income that are really important to sustain the services and the agency itself. And although you can't just say increase the test fee and there you go, there's the examiner pay increase that we all think is really important, clearly it's a good punch in the business case that if you increase the test fee, you can close that deficit gap and get to a point where you can afford to actually pay examiners more. I think you can afford to pay examiners more now because by not paying them more, you're generating another massive cost in terms of not delivering test services regardless. So hopefully after this report, there will be more drive and focus on what we know are the key problems at play in the entire driving test waiting time crisis, which, with all due respect to Loveday Ryder, as she's exiting the organisation, she at one point said to me, "Is it really a crisis?" And to which DIA, we shot back, "Of course it's a crisis. You're not delivering on your core remit. We have waiting times that have nearly doubled since lockdown ended, when you should have been in recovery mode, and you're leaking staff like a leaky bucket and not able to recruit any more people." I don't know how much more you could describe that as an actual crisis, and perhaps not seeing it as a crisis has been possibly one of the issues throughout all of this. Anyway, thanks for listening, folks. Hope to get back to you with more data and information from this report as we continue to plow through it. And what will be DVSA's response is interesting, because so far we're now on nearly the end of day on Tuesday. This report is embargoed, and that embargo is due to lift at midnight tonight. I'm surprised that as stakeholder organisations that they now have possession of this report, we have not been equipped even with an embargoed response from DVSA yet. But perhaps they're still digesting what's in the report itself, even though they'll have had it, a much further time than we've had it and the media have had it. You will hear me on the media today because the media has sent the report embargoed as well to give them time to write their stories on it. So you may also be approached by the media yourself as driving instructors to give your view on it from the coalface. So let them have it. Let them know what it feels like on the streets and on the roads of the UK, dealing with this crisis on the ground for you and your pupils. And let's bring some, continue to bring some pressure to bear on solutions that are actually sustainable to bring down test waiting times and improve the issues in the industry and the sector. Thanks a lot, folks. Speak to you soon.